So in terms of my, can you hear me okay, everybody? Can I just check? So, okay, brilliant, good. Um, so in terms of my SEN uh, background, I've I have a lived experience of autism. So I have a number of family members with autism from my childhood. So I've kind of lived with it forever, really. Um, and also one of my own children has autism. So I've also been teaching in SEN now for a very long time. um, and for the last, I suppose, 10 years, I've been on a bit of a journey, as I'm sure some of you have as well, with the more demand avoidance presentation of autism. Um, and that's also becoming, part of, I suppose, of my lived experience. Um, I would say when I first came across the demand avoidance side of autism, I was teaching at the time, and I really tried everything in my toolbox for the sort of previous 20 odd years that I'd been teaching at the time. And I just couldn't get anything to work. And it was so frustrating. And I had a child in my class. I just went home every day thinking, I just don't know what to do with this young person. And everything that I'm trying is really not making any inroads at all. Um, and then I came across this article one day in an autism journal, and it talked about PDA. And as I read it, it just the light bulb went on, and I thought, gosh, this is this is what I'm dealing with at work, and hadn't realised. And I started to put in some of the strategies it suggested in that article, and immediately I started to see some progress with that young person, and they really began to turn around and start to access some learning. Um, and it was really really good to see that. And since then, I've had the pleasure of working with many parents and children with demand avoidance. And certainly, as a principal, I'm getting increased consultations for children with this profile. And I know that the PDA Society have done some research around school access for our children, are saying that 70% of pupils with a PDA profile are not accessing education, and that's such a bleak statistic. But I think my message to you this evening is that it really doesn't have to be like that. And I think we've discovered over the last sort of 8 years or so that there really is hope and a way forward. So that's just a little sort of starter to introduce myself. And I'm just going to get Nick, who's here, to just add a little bit.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Nick. I'm the head of our satellite centres. We have a primary and secondary centre now. And I've worked with young people with SEN in one form or another since I was very young. So I've been working with young people with SEN for about 33 years, voluntarily and then through education. We opened up the satellite site over 2 years ago, and our students have been supporting us to learn more about demand avoidance as well as us supporting them. So hopefully we'll be able to support you this evening in understanding some of the strategies we use and the things that we've learned. So it is. I'm just going to set the
Yes,
PowerPoint
we're
up for
just
you
trying
this
to share
evening.
the screen with
Sorry.
you. Oh, good thing I've got you here. IT is not my strength, I'm afraid.
So,
Just to say, we've had a question in the chat already, but I think you'll probably kind of cover it anyway. But also, I can kind of collate the questions towards the end. But someone's saying, is PDA associated with a particular type of autism? So I'll probably leave you to do your stuff, and
yeah,
the answer will
Yes.
probably come out. And if
no
it doesn't,
problem.
we'll
Can
come back to it at
everybody
the end.
see the PowerPoint?
I can, yes.
Yes, brilliant.
Fabulous.
Lovely.
That's good. Okay, so that's us. Hopefully we'll be able to share the PowerPoint with you, so you can reflect on some of the things we talk about this evening. But it's also obviously got our details there as well if you needed to contact us. So this is what we're going to cover. What is demand avoidance? What are the challenges? And I'm sure that you are all very aware of the challenges, because I think most of you probably that have hopped on here tonight are probably living with somebody or have somebody in your family with demand avoidance, and that's why you're interested. But we particularly want to look at what makes a good approach. So I think that will, take up quite a lot of our time this evening. Nick will really talk you through that, because day in, day out, this is really what she's doing. We'll signpost you as well to where you can get some more support. And I think it'd be really good at the end if we have some time for questions, because we really want to hear from you what you want to know that perhaps we don't cover. So first of all, what is PDA? So it is an autistic condition. It comes under the umbrella of autism, but unfortunately, there isn't a separate diagnosis yet for PDA in any of the health manuals. So children are often diagnosed with autism or autism and ADHD, and often those two conditions do go together, not always. So, children have share sort of common elements with autism. So the things like difficulties with social communication, and the sort of restrictive patterns of behaviour that we see, that's very common in children with PDA as well. But the difference is that our children have an anxiety-driven need to avoid everyday demands and expectations. And that even includes things that they enjoy, which seems very bizarre. But we've seen it time and time again that children struggle to access activities that they do enjoy. But if they think it's an expectation, that drive to avoid it is stronger than the desire to do that thing. They tend to use approaches that are social in nature to avoid those demands. So quite often they will use excuses, and the excuse often isn't the actual thing that's causing the problem, because actually it's that that the avoidance of the demand that is the biggest issue, but they often can't admit that. So they will come out with some other excuse, often to do with not feeling well or having a pain in their leg or whatever it might be. So I suppose the key really is to, and when we do our training for perhaps people that haven't got much experience, is we say that the behaviour looks like it's a bad or naughty behaviour, but it really isn't. The behaviour that you see is definitely anxiety driven. And that's a real priority to remember that always, when we're working with this group of children. So one of the things I like to talk about is really how you can know if your child does have demand avoidance, as opposed to other similar presenting conditions, because sometimes children may have some kind of, although all children with PDA do have trauma from their experiences, but there are some children that have life trauma experiences or attachment difficulties, and some of their behaviours can appear similar. And there are also some other conditions where from an outside point of view, the behaviours seem very similar. So how do you know that your young person has demand avoidant traits that come from anxiety. And I always say that the thing really to watch is to watch and be really observant around demands and their reaction to those demands. So it's important to think about what a demand is, first of all, because there are different types of demands, and there are very many of them. And as the day increases, the demands increase, which is quite often why you will see a rise in anxiety levels. But there are things that we call direct demands. So those are things where we verbally perhaps give direction, brush your hair, get in the car, all of those things that we expect our children to do every day, just as part of everyday life. But then you have things like subtle demands. So a subtle demand would be something like perhaps a child that doesn't like washing or having a bath, and you're running the bath. You're not telling them to get in the bath, but even running the bath would be enough to be that subtle demand. Or you might put on a coat to go out, and that is enough for them to know that actually you're now wanting them to go transition and do something else. And they might not want to or might not be ready for that. So that is a demand as well. And then you have things like silent demands. So silent demands are things like questions that, how many times do we ask our children questions, particularly in a school setting? Schedules can become a demand, because once a child sees a schedule, they immediately know you're expecting them to do something particular and at a particular time. So that is one of the challenges with children with PDA having the same diagnosis as children with more typical autism, is that the things that, or strategies that support children with typical autism, can actually exacerbate the difficulties for a child with PDA. And a schedule is a typical one of those, if it's a schedule that's issued by an adult. But even things like games that young people would often enjoy, if they've got rules to them, that then can also become a demand. So it's quite good sometimes just to sit down and think, actually, what kind of demands do I put on my young person during the day? What direct demands? What are the subtle demands? What are the silent demands that that are going on for them? Um, so that's when you see a sort of adverse reaction to those, I think that's what we look for when we're trying to identify whether a child has a demand avoidant profile. And one of the things I've often seen is what I call a child hovering, because they often want to please. They don't particularly want to upset people. But the thought of that demand is so strong. They get to a stage where they can't move forward to do that thing, but they don't want to upset you, and you can see them sort of physically hovering. So that's something I've seen a lot. So how else can you know that your child's demand avoidance, apart from observation? It's also conventional parenting and teaching and behavioural approaches that are perhaps rigid with consistent rules with rewards or sanctions. That kind of approach really doesn't work. So if you've been encouraged to try that, and you've tried it and you've seen and experienced that things have got worse, then it's very likely that your child is of this profile. So we're just going to look at some typical barriers and then challenges. And I'm sure that you will have experienced these things. So obviously the first very obvious one is the fact that our children are work and task avoidant. And that can be anything really that a child is expected to do. And they can have different responses to those tasks. So they might be children, the hovering children that I talked about, that sort of freeze, and they just can't do it or can't move on. They might sit down and refuse to move, or they might just refuse to do whatever you're asking them to do. And then you get children that have flight responses, so they may just try and get out of the situation. Um, and then you get children that have fight responses, so where they may throw things, hurt themselves, hurt other people as a response to trying to get out of a demand. And I think those are the children particularly that really struggle in a school environment, because, well, for obvious reasons, it's very difficult to manage a child with fight responses in a class where there may be 30 other children, and it is it's of a concern to you as parents, the children, the other parents, and it puts a lot of pressure on everybody then, to try and fix the situation that's not easily fixable. So that's one of the first barriers. The other one that we see a lot is perfectionism. So quite a lot of our children won't start a task, or they might destroy or disrupt as they don't want to get it wrong, and the fear of getting it wrong means that they can't start it, or they will sabotage. We see quite a lot of impulsivity. So children can often know the best and right thing, and I think you'll know when your children are very calm and in a good place. They are absolutely super young people, and very creative. They see the world in a very different way to the way other people see the world. But they've got so much to offer, and they really do, want to get things right. But in the moment, their impulsivity takes over, and they can't always do it. The other barrier that we see a lot is sort of oversensitivity, and this relates a little bit to the sort of perspective issues that a lot of people with autism have, where they struggle to see things from the point of view of somebody else, or they misunderstand what somebody else is saying or doing. And they can often have very long memories, so they might fixate onto something that could be real. It could be something that somebody really thinks or believes, but it more often than not they've got the wrong end of the stick. But that they will still hold on to that memory and that sort of negative feeling, and they can then become very overly sensitive to being in sort of similar situations. So perhaps people where a relationship has broken down, or in a situation that has gone wrong before, and it's very easy for them to get into sort of negative cycles because of that oversensitivity. And that then also leads to difficulty sustaining relationships. So if things have gone wrong, and particularly with friendships that perhaps have been working and then they seriously go wrong, it's very hard to repair. And children can quite quickly in school or at home get isolated, with peers being very sort of wary of them. So all of these things lead really to the challenges that young people face. they've obviously got an inability to conform to the traditional school environments, and that could be mainstream or special. So we often find that children are really struggling in mainstream, and the staff around that child feel that a special school placement might be the answer. But it isn't necessarily the answer, because special schools have clear guidelines and rules and expectations, in the same way that mainstream schools do. And particularly some schools for children with autism have a lot of structure to them. So, putting a child with autism with demand avoidance in a very structured environment in a special school um, isn't always the answer for them. And a lot of our children find themselves, in situations that are really not supportive or helping them to overcome their barriers. So that leads to breakdowns in placements. It may lead to school refusal for those children that have the sort of freeze responses that perhaps are masking some of their anxieties, and then you find over time that the children don't want to go into school, and it gets more and more difficult to get them in. And then there are other children that the placements are breaking down, and through exclusion because of dangerous behaviour or fight behaviour. And then that makes it very difficult within families. So often there will be sort of breakdown in family relationships. That leads to low self-esteem, and a lot of our young people have poor emotional and mental health because they feel that the difficulties in the family are related to them, and the challenges that they have, either accessing community, family activities, or school. And one of the other things that is challenging for our young people is that, we don't really know what the long-term outcomes are at the moment for our children. They can sometimes look bleak when things are not working, when children are quite young. But again, I would sort of return to what I said right at the beginning, really. We've seen so many children's lives turned around, and therefore their families' lives turned around when the right approach is put into place. And we see a difference often quite quickly, and that has been enough for us to really recognise that sort of long term the potential for our young people into adulthood can be really good. And I think we really believe that it's partly why at the link we made a very definite decision to support children with a demand avoidant profile, because we really do believe that with the right approach, we can make a difference. And not just us here, but we really want to enable other schools and other professionals, not just schools, social care, health care, to grow their understanding of our young people so that they can learn just to be a little bit flexible, and bring that understanding into their situation. And it's just sometimes very little changes that need to be made that can make a huge difference for our young people long term. So I just want to talk a little bit about challenges faced by parents and families, and I'm pretty sure that most of you here will know, and this will be your lived experience. So, one of the things that you probably will have faced is a lack of understanding from relevant support services, whether it's education, social care, or health, because it's not a well known condition, and most people have not really heard of it or haven't had experience. And that really can lead to a tendency for support services to focus on parenting capacity rather than your child's real barriers, because often you will be sent on perhaps a parenting support course, maybe an early bird course for children with autism, which are fantastic, but they might not give you the right strategies that you need for your young person. And then when things are not working out, there tends to be that sort of feeling that you haven't been putting in the strategies consistently, and you can then feel that, I suppose, that you can feel that you're a bad parent, and it really isn't that. It's just that the strategies you need are you need a different toolbox from perhaps the one you're directed to. All of this leads to sort of high anxiety around meeting the needs of family members, and I'm sure if you've got other children or elderly parents that you might be looking after as well, and it's very hard to meet the needs of everybody in a family when you've got a child with demand avoidance, because they control very much, or can control very much, what goes on in the family, and you have to continuously work around their needs and to make it work for everybody else, and everybody else has to be flexible to them. It's difficult maintaining work or meeting financial needs, particularly if your child is at risk of exclusion, or even if they're in school, but you might be having receiving lots of phone calls for support, or having to go in if children are on part-time timetables, for example. That happens quite a lot with children with demand avoidance anyway. So that makes it really hard, and puts a lot of pressure on families, and it can lead more easily to family breakdowns. And there's that sense of aloneness, really, in that can lead to poor emotional and mental health, because it's just a horrible feeling, thinking that nobody really understands. I think probably a lot of you here will feel all of these things, but I just want you to know that you aren't alone. There are lots, there's a lot of people on here tonight, and that will share your experiences and know how challenging it is. But one of the things that is very positive at the moment is that there is an increased understanding with professionals at the moment. And I've noticed that probably the last 3 years, probably. I often will go to schools or courses, and people have heard of demand avoidance now. They know what it is. They've got some experience of it. They're beginning to realise that something different is needed. So we're moving in the right direction, and that's got to be a positive thing. So those are the challenges. I am going to move over. I'm going to do a little swap with Nick, I think. So Nick's going to come in and talk about, this is the really important bit. What I'm sure you're all here for is because you know the barriers. Let's think about what makes a good approach to working with your child with demand avoidant traits. So I'm going to do a little swap. Nick's going to come here, and I'm going to move over there. There you go, Nick.
Okay, with no pressure there. Thanks. Hi, everybody. So one of my big drivers of working with young people with SEN has always been about digging deep and supporting our students. So um, I'm very much about well-being. I'm talking about well-being rather than behaviors of concern because it gives a much holistic point of view, and that's what we've had to work with our young people with demand avoidance. And it's all about connection, really, we found with our students, because without the connection, the trust isn't there. And without the trust, the anxiety is harder to manage for our students. So the PDA Society have a lovely acronym called PANDA. And we have a PANDA support group, which is where our parents come along to. And we chat to our parents and we support them. But it stands for picking your battles, anxiety management, negotiation and collaboration, disguise and manage demands, and adaptation. And I'm going to talk to you about how you can look at those individually to support your young person. So picking your battles, choosing your battles, I'm sure you may have heard that before, but learning to pick your battles is a really important skill with your young person. And you need to decide upon what type of battle it is. Is it a high priority battle? Is it non-negotiable? Is it a safety battle? Is it a safety rule? Is it desirable but not essential, that it's a demand that we are putting on our young people? Or is it a low priority and is it negotiable? And one activity we quite often do with people is to look at how you could pick your battles and how you can rate those into priorities. So one example we've got here is the young person is a middle child of 3, all of which are under 11. They've got autism, ADHD, and a demand avoidant profile. As part of their anxiety triggers, they've got transitions, everyday demands, accessing the school environment, working and socializing in groups. And the behaviors of concern are actually a flight where they may flee from the demand, they might fight, or they're risky and dangerous. They also have sensory processing issues and they're very highly touch and texture averse. They have poor sleep patterns and they have had CAMS involvement and prescribed medication for sleep, for anxiety, and for ADHD. Both parents and grandparents are in conflict around the best strategies to use for the young person and their challenging behaviour. So when we look at the demands that the young person has, there's lots of school demands, as you can see, home demands and health demands, and we would then prioritise which ones are high priority, which are desirable, and which are low priority. And it does depend on each individual. I'm sure you may well be looking at that going, yep, that's the demand. I'm not sure. It's an everyday demand that I see, and it's weighing up which ones are the high priorities that we must do, which ones are negotiable. I'm not going to make you all sit here and tell us your decisions on that, and it will be part of the PowerPoint for everybody when it gets sent out. But it helps us when we're working with our young students to decide which one is more appropriate. Just thinking of wearing school uniform as a site, we don't have a school uniform. One, because we understand that raises anxiety for our students, but also we like to work with our students on the sense of equality, and the staff don't wear a uniform either. So we get that equality sense together, and it gives expression of what our young people feel. They feel more comfortable in the clothing that they're wearing. So how do we do anxiety management? So I think it's really one of the key things is recognizing that it is an anxiety attack and we need to support our young people and move on. It's a stress behavior that we're seeing and not a misbehavior. And that our students' anxieties have built to a point that we may see behaviors of concern. So we try to reduce uncertainty. And as we said, That's really hard because most of our young students, you think to reduce anxiety, we might use a schedule, but schedules can put a demand on it as well. So it's balancing how we use schedules. I've worked with a lot of students where we collaborate on schedules. So we put a loose schedule in and then they fill it in with us. They'll tell us the time that something is going to happen. Um, and actually, they build their own schedules and it's flexible on their terms. But we still have certain things that we do. Need to think ahead. What point is an anxiety trigger going to happen? I'm probably teaching you something you already know with that. Also, knowing your child's current and historical triggers which affect their anxiety. Because although something may be new, you do have historical triggers that can, as Sandy was saying, come back in certain situations. So being able to understand those is really key and to remember them. I say I've worked with a lot of parents that suddenly go, oh yeah, that used to be a trigger. And then we add that into how we can help manage the anxiety. So one way we talk about anxiety management is when we determine what level of demand we'll be able to introduce depends on our anxiety levels. So if anxiety is high, may need to consider lowering the demands where we can. And when anxiety is low, we may be able to consider increasing them. And over the course of the last, I would say, 4 years, we've come up with some very different visual representations. We started with our seesaw, where anxiety is on one end and demand is on the other. So obviously, as the anxiety goes up, the demand comes down. And as anxiety comes down, the demand goes up. You can think of it as two dials that affect each other. And as you can see, as anxiety dial ramps up, the demand dial has to ramp down, and vice versa. And one of our staff, because we've got a lot of young people that like to game, talked about when you're gaming. If you're gaming in a computer game and you've got a lot of life, you're more likely to take more risks. Whereas if you've got a limited life, you're much more cautious. And that's how they sort of think about balancing that anxiety and demand. That actually, when a student is anxiety is high, our life is a little bit smaller, so we take more careful steps, and we can't put as much risk-taking demands in there. So it is a fluctuating thing. And just because a child likes something or was successful at it before doesn't mean they'll want to repeat it or that it'll be as successful as last time. So that might be a new interest. They may suddenly have found a new interest in Pokemon. And as a parent or as a carer or as a teacher, you learn everything you want to know about Pokemon. And the minute you think you know everything, your young child decides that actually, I don't want to share it. This is mine, it's precious to me, and it's raised by anxiety that you want to engage so much about it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, because it's great for connection, but it's just being mindful that an interest may suddenly change. And we know that for a lot of our young people, the pressure of something being successful before or them enjoying something, there is an anxiety of, will it be the same? And what if it is or it isn't? And having spoken to parents, we hear that a lot around days out, trips to Legoland. It was a fantastic trip to Legoland, but I never want to go again because it might not be as good, might not be as fun. With the students, when we're working with them, when they've been successful at something, they may not want to do it again because what if they're not as successful as they was the first time? As I said, often a shared interest, it's theirs and they may not want to share it. And quite often we come across young students that say, it was great, it was brilliant, but I've done it once. Why do I need to repeat it? Am I only doing it again to make you happy? Because yeah, it was great the first time, but I don't want to do it again. So sometimes it's a fluctuating thing. So just be aware that anxiety management changes with day to day, hour to hour, week to week. And I think that's one of the biggest things we've learnt with our students. So talking about negotiation and collaboration, keep calm and stay positive. So as a parent, as people working with our young children, remembering to keep calm. And we talk a lot about co-regulation. So a regulated adult is the best person for regulating our young people. Trying to be proactive, collaborating to solve problems, because by collaborating to solve the problem, the young person feels that they're starting to maintain their autonomy and control. And as we said, that's what drives the anxiety, is that trust and feeling in control. Negotiate to solve problems, and we talk a lot with our young people about the purpose and function of a demand, and the purpose and function of a problem that we need to solve, because it gives a much greater understanding of why we're doing it. Having fairness, building that trust, and being very honest. We use a lot of honesty, talking about natural consequences. If that happens, this will happen. So probably best if we do this instead. And we found that works very, very well with our students. And it gives that sense to our students around being equal, because we're having a discussion. We're not just saying no, we're not just saying you must do this. We're giving function, we're giving the natural consequences, and we're giving a purpose. And we're trusting our young people to help us control the situation. And one of the biggest things is it's okay to have been wrong, and admit it to our young people, because that builds us honesty and trust, and apologising when we get it wrong as well, because we aren't the young person and we may not have maybe listened as well as they hoped we would have in that moment. So we talk as well about disguising and managing demands. So we use a lot, you can use a lot of indirect demands. So what we call a running commentary, talking about what's happening, commenting on it, sort of musing what I might do as a suggestion, maybe asking the young person for help as well. And it's about, we also do quite a lot of shifting demand. So when it's a safety response, we talk about the government, and talking about, this is a rule that everybody in the country has. This isn't a rule I'm putting on you. This is a rule for that. We also think about how we position our words, whether you might just say, oh, thanks, as a sort of, a flippant, rather than asking please, because please is a no. Do you mind doing that? Thanks. Already you're sort of saying, yeah, it's fine. I know you try and do it. Making a demand and making sure the completion isn't a big deal. Sometimes it might just be great if we do this, and not focusing on it must be done. So understanding that it's not a big deal if it's not completed. As we said about matching the demand with the seesaw effect, or the games, the life in the games. But one of the biggest things is doing it together. Let's try it together. Let's do this together. Collaborating, and feeling equal. I have to admit, there's many a times I just can't do it. And the young person likes to prove that they can do it. And I thank them when we work together on it. So one of the things that we use within a school setting, works really well in school, is a backdoor approach. And we disguise curriculum demands in the interests of our students. And it's an approach that can work outside of school as well. It's based upon trust. There's no traditional expectation of answering, but it's a discussion or an activity that we share. We share an experience that allows connection to take place, and it reduces our demand. And as I said, it can be easily used within a home setting. So it's about setting up activities that show and showing no interest in it sometimes, and allowing the young person to just explore it and join them when they're ready. It's about being flexible to where you could go. So be prepared to completely veer away from the original activity or expectations. When we have set expectations, we don't bring the activity out straight away. We bring it out at the last minute, and we're very nonchalant about it. It's like, oh, I've got this. Because as Sandy was saying, there's those subtle demands that are there. If an activity is out for too long, it's a demand that is just sitting there. Don't lose heart if an activity gets destroyed. And think of what questions you could ask to get outcomes or extend learning onto another path or subject. But it does work within the home, and you can open up a lot, and this will work around a lot of emotions and feelings with students, with your young people. Just sort of doing this activity, but you might be able to ask about how they're feeling today, or are they enjoying it. We will send this home. I won't go through it all, but this is some of the questions that we Muse with our staff worked on around a young man who had an interest in buses, and how we looked at English and science and creative arts and maths and humanities and PSHE. And they're just musings that staff, whilst they're playing or out in the community with somebody, would just say, not expecting to get an answer, but the learning comes from it. One of my favourites is talking about why don't we have seatbelts on buses, and what bus do I need to go and get? I've got a young man that when I see him every day will show me a bus journey, and we just engage through that. So adaptation is one of the other things that he really about tolerate the use of humour. Again, that is very individual. Some students will accept humour, some students will accept sarcasm. But it is a day-to-day, student-to-student approach. Using distraction away from whatever's causing anxiety. Using novelty, having lots of new things, lots of new ideas. Some of our students love to role play. And a young man who didn't like working at all or attending to what adults wanted him to do, but we spent nearly 6 months dragon hunting, and now he now realizes, oh, it's great to do this activity or great to do that with these staff. So we use role play to build. Always being flexible, and allowing plenty of time where you can, and having a plan B. Plan A doesn't work, where am I going to go next? So, as we said, there's lots of ways of getting support out there. The PDA Society website. There are lots of books, which I'll show you some of the books that we have used. There's lots of articles, and there's lots of social media out there as well. On social media, there's parent support groups, especially on Facebook and on Instagram, and there are dedicated support groups now out on social media. It's on Instagram and Facebook as well. I haven't listed them for legal reasons, but they are definitely out there for you to see. And I follow quite a few, and it's some really interesting pieces. As we referenced, the PDA Society, it's a really great website, and we've done a lot of work with the PDA Society. And when we first started up, we were definitely grateful of it being there. And on there is an exemplar of an EHCP for a young person with demand avoidance. and I've recommended that to a lot of parents over the time. In terms of useful reading material, the Understanding PDA Syndrome in Children was our Bible when we first started with our young people. Um, and then we've looked into other books as well. There's the Introduction to PDA for teachers, from perspective of a young person as well. There's also a guide for PDA teens now that's been written by PDA teens, and I was lucky enough to go to the book launch and meet some of those young people and hear their stories, and it was great perspective. And there is a parent book as well out there of how to be a parent for a PDA. One of the books that we use a lot on our sites has been The Explosive Child by Ross Green, where we look at the assessment of lagging skills that our students have, and how we can resolve unsolved problems with them. And it's really supported us to collaboratively overcome barriers and behaviours of concern with our students. And we've been able to work together and move forward to find solutions, so that it's not something we're just trying to introduce, it's something that's coming from our student voice. And also, we've been lucky enough to work with other professionals out there, and there are 3 articles that we have written, and these are all accessible. They're practitioner research that we have done as a school, and they are all linked on our website. So hopefully I didn't run through that too quickly for you, and I'll pass you back to Sandy.
I'm going to stop sharing, hopefully. Figure out how to stop sharing. That's how you stop sharing. Thank you. Good. Okay. So I think we're going to stop recording now.